Welcome to the Football Podcast. This is your host, Mr. NumberNine.
And this is The Fool.
Hi everyone. Due to the incredible amounts of feedback we've received for our previous Super League podcast, which was to do with potential league systems, we've decided that there's a lot more to say about this potential European Super League, which could have happened, and consequences fallout.
Yeah, I think the two podcasts we've mentioned, European Super Leagues and European football structures, have been two of our most listened to podcasts.
Yes. There are other continental Super Leagues emerging as we speak.
Yeah. And not to mention other national leagues that are closed, such as the MLS and the A-League.
Yes. And those of you who remember the first podcast where we talked about my ideal European structure, if we were to have a merged league system, is there would be an international pyramid with a FIFA Champions League, and then maybe a secondary equivalent of a Europa League, maybe called the Intercontinental League or something like that.
Yeah.
The world likes the idea of Super Leagues. As much as it's been resisted by UEFA and FIFA in Europe, it's picking up around the world. There was a call from Gary Neville to just get the 6 relegated. The 3 bottom clubs stay and the 3 promoted clubs get promoted.
That's probably a bit harsh. But
I mean, I think if they had stayed, like now with Real and Barca, that would have been what would happen to them. Like, Premier League would go, yep, you're expelled from the league.
I expect if they had stayed, that the Premier League and FA had just expelled them fully and be like, you can't play in England. But that's what would have happened. And UEFA said you can't play in UEFA competitions. And the same with the other FAs.
That's what kind of threw me off, because the word on the street was that Liverpool, Manchester United, and Arsenal were secretly hoping for that to happen. And they were basically going to play their youth teams and B-sides anyway in Premier League, and they were just going to focus on the Super League games. And that's all they cared about. And because they have less games, they'd be less tired. And they really wanted their players to be banned from representing their country because, even less games and, better performance. So they were actually okay with that. They were secretly hoping that they would get an international ban, their players, and they were kind of okay with the idea that they get kicked out of the league. At least Arsenal, United, and Liverpool were.
I know they sort of suggested that they could continue playing, but I would suspect that avenue had to be the expected outcome.
There is a rule with the Premier League going that you cannot compete in any other competitive league without the permission of the Premier League, and obviously the rest of the 14 would just go, no, F you, you're out of here. There's the door, see you later, bye Felicia. And I think this is where City and Chelsea were like, oh, they're actually going to look to kick us out, which is what I think was a realistic threat. So Chelsea and City were like, no. We're sorry, please forgive us. And at which point Spurs was like, what are we doing here? Guys, I got this invite, I got really excited, At which point for the rest of the big six, the rest of the 3, they just, it wasn't tenable anymore. Without City and Chelsea, and Spurs, they kind of lost a bit of legitimacy of, the big clubs are all here.
It sort of had the reverse effect. So, Chelsea and City had sort of jumped in because, that's where the other big clubs are going. We sort of have to go there to keep the competition alive. And then once they jumped out, everybody else was like, well, what's the point of being in this league if we're going to get punished and not play the teams that we actually want to play? So
what would have been interesting is if they did stick to it and got kicked out, but the the Football League, who run the Championship and League 1 and League 2 had decided, okay, we're not going to kick you out, but you're in the Championship and you can never get promoted to the Premiership. The Premiership is just like, yep, these 4 are exiled for life. So they win the Championship, they're not promoted. See ya. You can play your B team in the Championship, that's fine. Like, we're good with that. I mean, and that's not an unreasonable situation.
What if the FA or the league had said that they can't even be, they have to start at the bottom because they didn't count teams anymore or something? If they weren't relegated, they were kicked out.
So they would have to then also be exiled from the Football League. They'd have to be exiled from the Football League as well, and then they'd have to start from the bottom of the... to be fair, they just got up in like 5 or 6 years, be in the Football League pyramid anyway.
I was meaning start at the bottom of the Football League pyramid. But, I mean, it's just a few years to get up there, but it's hilarious.
There's an interesting proposal in Scotland, north of the border, that Rangers and Celtic play their B teams in the 4th division.
Well, they have been wanting to. I think both Celtics and Rangers have pretty much been wanting to play in the Premier.
Yeah, as in the Scottish 4th division, not
the
English 4th division. Right. Just to be clear on this, like, they would be playing their reserve sides. Part of it is that they would gain a lot of money for the lower division games because it's Rangers and Celtics still, and they have fans coming through. And there are definitely arguments against it because it's like, okay, if Rangers and Celtic can do it, why can't Hearts and Hibs and then maybe Aberdeen and Dundee? These are all the big clubs in Scotland. At which point, the 4th division people just go like, we're not just fodder for your...
We're real people too. We exist.
Yeah, it was a thing. They were never going to be promoted into the 3rd division and things like that. And it gave them meaningful games, and it gave those clubs some money games. So it was a proposal, so it was an interesting idea, at least.
It is an interesting proposal, and I think, it's got some good merits, but it has some pitfalls. So
the other interesting proposal, which I don't know what happens now with the Super League debacle, is Belgium and Holland were going to combine their leagues. Top divisions.
That would have been interesting.
All the clubs in both divisions had agreed, and they were basically trying to figure out what they wanted to do, whether they were just going to have the top leagues and then maybe a 2nd division, and then basically everything else becomes a national pyramid supporting those two in a Belgian side and a Dutch side, or whether they were going to merge their two pyramids all the way down, which would have interesting consequences, because that would basically give the Benelux countries a league system that's as deep as England, going all the way down. I mean, okay, when I say Benelux, Benny, because Luxembourg aren't part of it, but I think they were going to call it the Benny League or something like that, because it would be Belgium and the Netherlands. But yes, because they were also considering doing something similar with Holland, Scotland, Belgium, and Portugal together, like an Atlantic League, basically just combine their top divisions and everything. Okay, I don't have a problem with this idea because, once again, it's not a closed system. It's merging two pyramids to make them more competitive because it is believed if those two leagues combined, they would be number 6 after France.
That would,
And in terms of money, and they would immediately, their TV rights would go from being worth about 80 million each to about 400 million.
That's a big jump. That does seem to make it very worth it.
The Beneliga has a reasonable amount of support, I think. It has its detractors, and I could see both sides' arguments. I don't think anybody who is anti-Beneliga don't understand how money works, for example. I'm one of those people.
Yeah.
But I'm also like the people who do support it. There's a reason why people call them greedy, and they're only in it for the money. It's a tough situation to be in, especially if you're like Holland, where you traditionally have an amazing league with so many storied clubs.
Yeah.
And now there's basically maybe Ajax that compete every year in the Champions League, and it's almost like the Dutch league was one of the most competitive leagues in the 2000s, and even to a certain extent the 2010s.
Yeah.
It's only in the last 2 or 3 years where Ajax has literally just started dominating an incredible amount. And I think I could understand why clubs like PSV, etc., would be very, very interested in trying to, give themselves more like money.
Yeah. Having more resources, I think, is a better way of putting it as well. Whilst it comes
And
down
maybe
to
even
money,
access to greater markets and things like this.
Yeah, which will make them a more attractive proposition for higher end players or top end players who therefore will see it as a good place to go, which means they have better quality of football, they get more fans, there is better football, they'll do better in Europe and everything. So it has a positive feedback loop there. It's not just about making lots of money, it's also about getting the exposure and getting the attractiveness of the league and of your games in so that people will watch it.
Absolutely.
But for that, you need money.
Yeah. It's a chicken and egg. You need one to get the other,
Yeah.
If they do it wrong, it could destroy what they've built.
Yeah, exactly. There is a fine line to walk there, right, with the fans, because the fans just want, especially some of them, the die-hard fans are like, we're in it for the purity of the game. We want to...
Like, I think to a certain extent, like, it's how attractive can they make, for example, for Dutch fans to go, like, I think PSV and Ajax fans might be happy to go and play Anderlecht or Club Bruges, those big name Belgian clubs, like they're kind of famous, on both sides of the border, but they also have to think about going to play like smaller clubs, mid-table, clubs, and not just them, like clubs like Roda JC will have to go do that, like, as well. Like the non-big clubs of the mid-table clubs of Holland, how attractive is it for them to play the mid-table clubs of Belgium and vice versa?
Yeah, well, exactly. But I guess a little bit of that is if you increased your size and therefore the attractiveness of the market, all the clubs will be getting a bit more money, so they'll slowly become it'll be a bit more attractive for the clubs as well.
If I gotta give it a Premier League sort of example, like it took a while for Chelsea to get a rivalry with Manchester United.
Yeah.
And Liverpool.
Yeah.
It didn't, and it's taken maybe 20 years. And like, I'm not saying it happened from the Abramovich era only, but like once Chelsea started being a big club and competing at the top of the Premier League.
Yeah.
But it took 20 years to build that, and the Dutch league need to have that. They don't have a guarantee that they will get there, if that makes sense. Just because you put the seeds doesn't mean the plant will grow.
Yeah, exactly. They've just got a bit of that is the tendering, right? They've got to water it and make sure everything's going right. And I guess a little bit of that is how that football structure goes. Like, do they just have the one league at the top and it's 10 teams, maybe?
I think at the end of the day, it's only viable if they have at least a joint pyramid for at least 3 or 4 structures, right? I can see why, but I also see that if they do this, the UEFA, they have to be like, this is the blueprint why it's allowed and when it could be allowed in the future, because I think I can see the idea of places like Switzerland, Austria, the Balkans, even maybe in Scandinavia, deciding, hey, let's look at combining leagues. Like we have especially Scandinavia, because those countries are very integrated. The Balkans, I'm just like, why don't we just start civil wars there again if you're just going to combine leagues? Like, I mean, sure, they all used to play in the Yugoslav League, but we can all tell this is a bad idea.
Yeah. That's not going to end well.
Like the first game between Dinamo Zagreb and Red Star Belgrade is just going to be a bloodbath. Like, we just know.
I mean, the games in each of the respective leagues are bad enough as it is.
At least let another 3 decades pass before we go down that road again. It's too soon. But because of the way they've reformed Europe now, because France gets a bit more extra European spots. And I think at the moment Portugal is number 6, and I believe Portugal is going to remain number 6 for the foreseeable future, because they're just the game is run better in Portugal than it is in Russia. Russia's 7th, even though they have way more people in Russia and technically more money. Portugal, it's closer to South America. It's the perfect bridge country. So they're always making good deals, buying players young, scouting them properly, and selling them high. And their players have a proven track record of doing well in Europe, which doesn't always work for Russian League and Ukrainian League players. So I think Portugal will remain six. And I also think it would have been interesting if Porto and Benfica were one of those two, along with Ajax, as we mentioned in our previous podcast, as those other three, because those three are seller clubs. They buy young, low, but they would not potentially, if they survive the Super League, heck, if they're part of the 15, they can't be relegated. They're probably not selling, and they're making really good teams.
Yeah.
Because they know how to win in the European stage. Yeah. They have pedigree. They have good people that know how to run good football clubs.
From their point of view, it's a good move. I think you're right that UEFA need to ensure that they've got control of it, because otherwise it could get a bit crazy.
Would you necessarily object to a Atlantic League with Holland, Belgium, Portugal, and Scotland? Because that would immediately make a bunch of European brand name clubs be relevant in their home make them so much more powerful.
No, it's in principle, no. I would just be worried about the precedent
and the practice.
And the practice, and ensuring that how come then you couldn't have the English, French, German, Spanish, Italian leagues merge and have a super continental league?
Yeah.
You still have the openness of it, which...
As you know, I am not against a continental league as long as there is a pyramid and it's not a closed
To be fair, actually, I was about to say, though that is an open system with a pyramid underneath it, so hey, why not just allow this to happen? This may organically make things better. Okay.
All right, so continuing on about this conversation about Super Leagues, there's been a lot of speculation on the internet about how a proposed Liga MX and MLS would work. Because the idea is not new, and it's something both leagues kind of want. Both leagues have something the other wants.
Yeah.
The Americans want the Mexican legitimacy. I think that's a fair way of describing it. The actual fan culture and everything that they have, and because it's even for MLS games, the highest audience comes during games when they play against Liga MX sides. Right. So there's already a regular across-the-border fixture. So, imagine if the champions of England and Scotland played every year. So Celtic, Rangers.
That's the Celtic and Rangers wet dream, really, but yeah.
Every year had a game. As opposed to imagine as if the Charity Shield, for example, were played between those two.
Yeah.
So instead of being part of the regular league and having that money, they would be getting some of that money from getting a game, and even maybe a group of games, perhaps a playoff, a league, a British Cup system, maybe with Welsh clubs and Northern Irish clubs. You could see all these other clubs would be into it. But there's no reason for the English clubs to get into it. They already have money and legitimacy.
Yeah.
This is why it's not already happened in Europe or any other country. Now, or it hasn't really happened with something like the Premier League, and it probably will never happen with one of those top four leagues unless there's a shake-up.
Or some sort of fan swell support for it.
It's also different now, apparently, and I'm not a follower of African football, because there was a lot of comments I was reading and in forums when the ESL was all announced. Apparently, Africa is making a Super League. And it's going to be a closed system, apparently.
Who would have thought it?
I don't know much about it, and how the process would work, but the FIFA has agreed to it. Now, I don't think there's a double standard here, because I think you can argue that Africa as a continent is still developing. That's no disrespect to their football. I think they have a long football tradition and their culture and all that, but the money is what's developing, the business side of things.
I think you're right. From a national team and a player point of view, it's not really a developing area, but from the Football League and structure point of view, then yes. And so, yeah, it may make sense to do it this way and have the closed, well, it sounds like 20 teams going into the Super League.
Yeah, 20 teams.
So, and it may help to provide better, pathways for African players, which could only be better in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, I've looked at some of the clubs that compete. There's a lot of North African clubs, which, not surprised. Egypt, Morocco, and Tunisia are all really, at the club level, that is, really, really popular. And I'm assuming a lot of the South African big clubs, Kaizer Chiefs, Orlando Pirates, and Mamelodi Sundowns, they're like just, I'm sure they're going to be in. And I'm sure there'll be a few of the West African countries represented with clubs like clubs in Ghana, Nigeria, because I think it would be difficult and Cameroon, obviously, just because they produce so much talent.
Exactly. You got to have something in there.
I mean, I think North, South, and West Africa, but then there's probably because clubs in East Africa, like in Kenya and Tanzania, while they're not big in doing well in the CAF, the African Champions League, they're big clubs. They sell out, and they're I think amongst the oldest clubs in Africa outside of South Africa.
Yeah.
This is the thing. Africa is going to have a Super League, and we've already talked before where the MLS wants to merge with League MX, or has always act super coy when asked whether or not they want to merge, which you can take however you want. So if North America is effectively merging into a league, and that would be a closed system, and the African Super League, from my understanding, would also be a
it does appear that way, system. Yeah. It will be a closed system.
Europeans have these European big clubs have a very valid gripe to go, what the hell? So, because if the MLS system had relegation promotion, it was an open competition, I don't think any of us here would have any issues with it.
Exactly. If there was...
you can maybe make an exception for the MLS being a closed league, because that's how North American sports works.
Yeah, I mean, that's where that is, right? The MLS is just based on the rest of the North Americans, so they just went with the franchise system, but that's how it works.
That's the thing. And if they do merge North America, what does it set the precedent? Do the big clubs in Uruguay and Argentina suddenly go, why don't we play in the Brazilian league? Or the top clubs in Brazil just go, look, we're going to leave Brazil's league system, because there are issues with Brazilian football. Do not get me wrong. Their club level plays way too many games. Because they have to play in their national league, and then they have to play in their state league in the off-season. And Brazil has a Big 12. To the surprise of no one, they have the most number of big clubs in their systems. But then, there are big clubs on the continent. There's your Peñarol Nacional in Uruguay. You've got the Big Five in Argentina. You could make a decent South American league with those three countries, plus, representatives from others, and you could make a good I'm not suggesting a closed league, but what if they made a South American Super League, which was a, 2-division league, plus then you've got the pyramids in the other countries and whatnot. Once again, we're not opposed to a continent-wide system if it's an open system, but if they were to form a closed league, even would FIFA say act as vehemently against this as they did against the European one? Because this would be one of the few ways for South America to bring back parity with Europe. For a while, the Brazilian clubs were staying and were not staying, but were competing with the Europeans in the world stage. But this is this century, I'm meaning. But right now, it's really difficult for them to do that, because the funding is just the gap is massive.
So the Super League in these places may help with that and bring back the parity, and therefore spread the great game around the world a bit more, which is what FIFA wants. So it's perhaps what they say they want. So they probably won't object as much to a South American Super League as they would to a European Super League. But once again, where is that hypocrisy line then? Because it's got to be somewhere. But
But like now the way after post ESL and how much of a bad taste the idea of closed systems leaves in my mouth. Like I'm at this position where, China, the Chinese Super League, for all the criticism it gets for buying overseas players and local players not being good, they're not a closed system. They have relegation and promotion. So to me, they're a more legitimate league than the MLS or the A-League.
The other one is the A-League. That's our own, ownish.
Well, New Zealand flirts with it, right? It goes... It sometimes has it sometimes doesn't have it. The New Zealand League. But you can at least excuse that New Zealand is a semi-pro league. They're... And the level below it are all amateur.
The New Zealand top flight is pretty much a closed league, but then they sort of have the Chatham Cup and other things to have the more openness and have that fairy tale story.
The Chatham Cup is there, and traditionally, it's even with only having amateur clubs, it has had relegation. They've just decided, Football New Zealand has just decided to follow the model of Super Rugby and merge teams and make the smaller clubs feeders for the top tier, which is a closed system, and then the bottoms have the relegations. And I'm not necessarily against it because New Zealand is still very, like I said, other than Auckland City and Waitakere United and the Wellington Phoenix, there's no professional clubs.
Not really.
Really. In New Zealand. So
even the two Auckland clubs they're not really professional. They're semi-professional at best. They're just more professional than the rest of the New Zealand teams, basically.
Yeah, they're semi-professional. I mean, look, we love Waitakere. Obviously, I'm from New Zealand. These are my biases, and I think New Zealand has a strong heritage of football. And one of the reasons why Waitakere FC is strong is because they didn't convert to playing rugby union. They kept playing football. So that's how old Waitakere FC is, and Kumiu are. There's clubs that happen to not that did it, and they've been around forever. And people. Sure, non-football people are happy when Auckland City do well in Club World Championships, but I'm not because I'm a Waitakere fan, and they're our closest, they're our greatest rivals.
Exactly.
I want Waitakere to do well, and your New Zealand isn't pretending to be a top-tier professional cool league like the MLS and the A-League are. So to me, any country with the relegation promotion system has a better league than the MLS or the A-League. And I don't think that's unfair.
It depends on the New Zealand system. It is being set up to help push young players as best along the pathways they can. It's not designed around some sort of franchise money-making thing. It's actually looking at going, how can we ensure we have our best players playing at the top level as quickly as possible and them being exposed to the international scene so that they could get a bit more lucrative contracts, and we can have good players playing in proper things so that we can have a good national team. And having the semi-closed or the current model seems to be the best way of doing that because it ensures the best players are playing together, and then one of them, Waitakere or Auckland City, basically get to go play in the club championships, and those players get to be showcased on the world scene then, and that helps them get picked up. So.
Yeah, and that's the thing, but it's still, I don't think we're going to argue that the right clubs aren't in that top tier for New Zealand, at least. There isn't the equivalent of an Arsenal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In the New Zealand Football League. You've got your clubs like, Napier City Rovers, you've got Miramar, and these guys who have been the big clubs of New Zealand football since pretty much ever. Canterbury United, Well, look, to be fair, Napier City Rovers aren't there. They're part of Hawke's Bay United, but they're part of it. Everybody knows it's just basically.
As you said, there's a bit of merging going on and renaming to make them a bit more regional based.
Waitakere United is really Waitakere FC and suburbs and Kumiu.
And some of the regional ones have been renamed as their regions as opposed to the traditional club name and things like that. Hawke's Bay as opposed to.
That's.
Napier City
as opposed to Napier City, which I'm sure Hastings is super happy about.
We all know it's really just Napier City Rovers.
Yeah.
Sorry, Hastings.
Yeah, pretty much.
As a side point, the New Zealand Football League is going back to a open system. So they'll have 3 regional leagues, Northern League, Central League, Southern League, with 30 teams in each of those, and then the top 10 sides out of all those, or maybe the top 12 sides, will go into a national league phase during the summer. So the regional ones over winter, and then they'll do a national league over the summer.
So they're following the Brazilian system.
So yes, it's lots
Fair
of football
enough.
for everyone, but we'll see how that goes. They're hoping to get the women's game to the same bit, so it's starting with a franchise type system with the women's game, but they're hoping to expand it to a fully club-based model in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to do it that way.
Once again, they're still their focus is still on youth development and sustainability of the clubs. So trying to ensure the clubs can survive, but prioritizing youth development up through the ranks to get a better national team.
Yeah.
It does sound promising in that regards.
Fingers crossed. I guess that's all we have time for. Thanks for listening, and look forward to hearing from you next time.
Yes, catch you next time.